Today we're diving into the incredible story of ancient Israel's golden age. We're talking about a time of unbelievable wisdom and wealth that just came crashing down in the span of a single generation. It's this amazing story of political drama, leadership failures, and epic showdowns that, honestly, has lessons that are just as relevant today.
So, right from the start, we're looking at a huge paradox. You have King Solomon, famous for being the wisest man, maybe ever, and yet the minute he's gone, his entire kingdom falls apart. So the big question we're tackling here is how? How does that much wisdom lead to that much failure? What on earth happened that caused a unified, powerful nation to just completely collapse?
All right, so our story has to begin with the man himself, King Solomon. He inherited this amazing, unified kingdom from his father David. He famously asks God for wisdom, and he gets it in spades. But the end of his life, well, that tells a very, very different story.
And this quote just nails the contradiction. This is the guy who wrote all these proverbs warning people about temptation, and he ends up with hundreds of foreign wives who turn his heart to their gods. Now, this wasn't just a personal problem. It was a huge political move, and it teaches us something crucial. A leader's so-called private choices almost never stay private. Those choices put the first fatal crack in the foundation of his kingdom, setting the whole thing up for disaster.
So, after Solomon dies, his son Rehoboam takes the throne. And right away, the kingdom's entire future comes down to a single decision. The people come to him, and they have a pretty reasonable request. Hey, can you maybe lighten the heavy taxes and labor your dad put on us? His choice here is going to change history forever. He gets two totally different pieces of advice. You've got the elders, the guys who served his wise father, and they tell him, basically, practice servant leadership. If you serve the people, they'll serve you forever. But then you've got his friends, the young guys he grew up with, and they tell him to show everyone who's boss, to be even tougher than his dad ever was. So there it is, two paths right in front of him. A clear choice between listening to the people or dominating them. In Rehoboam, in this just classic failure of leadership, he mistakes cruelty for strength. He picks authoritarian rule. He actually tells the people he won't just whip them like his father, he's going to scourge them with scorpions. The result? It's immediate, it's catastrophic. The 10 northern tribes rebel, they shout, "We have no share in David." And just like that, the kingdom is shattered. So now you've got what historians call the divided monarchy. In the south, you have Rehoboam, Solomon's kid, ruling over the single tribe of Judah from the capital, Jerusalem. But up north, the 10 rebel tribes go and pick their own king, a guy named Jeroboam who used to be one of Solomon's officials. The United Kingdom is a thing of the past. Now, Jeroboam has a big political problem. Religious law says his people have to go south to Jerusalem to worship, but that's enemy territory now. So what does he do? We see this theme again and again. He makes a purely political decision that has devastating spiritual consequences. To keep his power, he sets up new worship centers in the north. And what does he put in them? 2 golden calves. He literally tells the people, "Here are your gods, O Israel." This one act kickstarts the Northern Kingdom's spiritual freefall. The rot really does start at the top.
From there, the Northern Kingdom's path of corruption just gets worse and worse, king after king, until it hits absolute rock bottom with the rise of its most wicked ruler. And his reign is going to bring him face to face with a lone, really powerful prophet.
Okay, so let's meet the main characters in this drama. You've got King Ahab, who the text says did more evil than any king before him. You have his wife, Jezebel, a foreign princess who brings her state-sponsored worship of the storm god Baal right into the heart of Israel. And then, standing against both of them, is the prophet Elijah, the one guy speaking for God in a totally corrupt land.
Now, Jezebel represents this really nasty kind of evil. See, King Ahab wants this vineyard that belongs to a guy named Naboth. Naboth says no. So what does Jezebel do? She doesn't just hire some thugs. No, she's more clever than that. She announces a religious fast, she hires false witnesses, and has Naboth legally executed for blasphemy. She weaponizes the very laws of God to commit murder. I mean, that is the definition of religious evil.
This whole conflict between true worship and false worship just can't last. It's all building to a breaking point, and it all comes to a head in one of the most dramatic confrontations you'll ever read about, a public showdown on top of Mount Carmel to decide once and for all who the true God really is.
And the odds?
I mean, they're just insane. On one side, you have 450 state-sponsored prophets of the god Baal. They're backed by the king, the queen, the whole system. And on the other side, you have one man, Elijah.
So Elijah walks out in front of the whole nation, and he just lays it on the line. No more sitting on the fence, no more trying to have it both ways. He forces them to make a choice. And the test is simple. Each side prepares a sacrifice, but nobody lights a fire. The God who answers with fire from heaven, he is the true God.
So the prophets of Baal go first. They're praying, they're chanting, they're even cutting themselves for hours, and nothing happens. And this is where you see Elijah's confidence. He starts openly mocking them. Is your God on vacation? Maybe he's busy? Is he asleep? You gotta love the sarcasm. It's this moment of incredible tension and real personality.
Then it's Elijah's turn. And just to make the point, to make it even more dramatic, he has them drench his altar with barrels of water, over and over until it's completely soaked. He says one short, simple prayer, and bam, fire falls from heaven. It consumes the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, even the water in the trench. The victory is absolute. It's undeniable.
Now you would think a victory that decisive would change everything, right? But it didn't. The corruption in the northern kingdom was just too deep. The story doesn't end with a big revival. It ends in judgment and exile.
And here's what happened historically. About 200 years after that split, the Assyrian Empire comes in and just wipes the northern kingdom of Israel off the map. Its people are scattered. They become the lost 10 tribes. Then, about 130 years after that, the southern kingdom of Judah also falls, this time to Babylon. And they destroy Jerusalem and Solomon's magnificent temple. The fall is complete.
So here's the crucial takeaway. One incredible, miraculous event couldn't reverse generations of bad choices. The systems were too corrupt. The kingdom that started with so much promise ended in total ruin. It's a really powerful reminder of how culture can outweigh a single moment of clarity. But this isn't just a story about failure. See, even as the prophets were warning that this disaster was coming, they were also talking about hope, about a future king, about a story that wasn't really over yet. And that leaves us with this final, huge question. What happens when everything is lost? When the kingdom is gone, the temple is rubble, and the people are scattered in exile? It's a question that sets the stage for the next, and maybe the most important chapter in this long, dramatic story.